Hi, Boston.
Elaine!
Rowan!
I love you!
I love you too. Can we just take a moment and just appreciate the fact that we are sitting on the same stage that Michelle Obama was yesterday? If we weren't already nervous.
I know, that's too
It just
overwhelming.
sets the bar
You
way
can't
up
do
here.
that. Elaine, I think of you as this fairy godmother in my life. I really do. I think of you as like this godmother, this fairy angel that's come into my life, and I look up to you in so many ways. And I don't know, I've had a subscription to Teen Vogue since I was probably 11 or 10, and I've sort of watched this magazine change from this thing that felt a little alienating, felt like something that wasn't accessible to me, to what it is now, which speaks directly to me. Yeah, I have this weird relationship with it because I'm friends with you, I've been on the cover, but I'm also just this really big fan.
Which makes you perfect to have this conversation.
Right.
By the way, I just want to say it's a little weird because I feel I've interviewed you so many times at this point that I'm used to being on the other end of it.
I know, now I get to turn the
And now you're
tables.
turning the tables on me. I feel like you're trying to go Oprah on me right now. I hope you get some tears.
Oh, I hope I get some tears too. That's pretty amazing. Obviously, you sort of became known because you were the youngest editor-in-chief in Condé Nast history. You were also, yeah. You were also only the second black editor-in-chief in Condé Nast history. You were also the first before you were editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue, you were actually there as a beauty director, and you were the first black beauty director in Condé Nast's 107-year history. I just want to start there. You're a woman of firsts. You've been the first of a lot of things, and I want to talk about how you realized that, how you sort of came into Teen Vogue, and especially what it was like to realize you were the first of all these things.
Well, it's interesting because, first of all, I didn't realize I was a first when I just accepted a job, right? My first job at Teen Vogue was beauty director. I was 25, and I was still wrapping my head around what that meant when I learned via headlines that I was the first black beauty director in Condé Nast history. And the weight of that hit me, and I realized two things. One, it was interesting to me that race was in the headline. Like, I got a new job that I felt I had really worked hard for and was really grateful for, but I realized that I'm never just going to be Elaine got the job. It's going to be Elaine, the black editor, the first black editor. And so I struggled with it a little bit because I just thought, wow, in 2012, we're still having firsts of this sort. Let's just unpack that, right? And then it became, you know what? This is a reality of our world that we live in. My race is going to enter every room before I will. Before they know who I am, before anything, they're going to see the hair. They're going to say, this is an interesting, I haven't seen this before in this context. And so I realized actually the responsibility that comes with that and the opportunity that comes with that. And being the first meant that I was bringing my community with me. It means I was bringing a perspective that hadn't been represented there in that way before, and it empowered me to own that position as the first versus shying away from it and wanting to be like, let's not distract ourselves by the race card here. Let's focus on the work. And and it was that too. I wanted to obviously be appreciated for my perspective and for my work, but I wanted to embrace my culture and my identity while doing it. And I thought, you know what, this is an opportunity to bring my full self to this opportunity, and in doing so, it's an opportunity to speak to an audience of people who haven't really been spoken directly to on this particular platform. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about how it can sort of feel when people address you with like the title instead of just realizing the amount of work that you've done to actually change Teen Vogue as just like the first Black editor-in-chief or the youngest Black editor-in-chief, how that can sometimes imply that it was just given to you rather than you worked for it. So I kind of want to rewind, and I want to take us back. Like before college, before this was even an option, before you realized you wanted to be working at a magazine or whatever position that was. Take us back there. How did that all start?
Well, so I grew up in a small town, working class family, an interracial family. My dad is this like acoustic guitar playing kind of hippie rock guy. My mom is a gospel singer, Black woman, and my brother's this like biracial guy, punk rock guy with like, he had like a green mohawk the whole time we were growing up in the Bay Area. So I grew up in this really eclectic household that really embraced creativity and quirk and like individuality and kind of just let you be who you are. And I don't think I really appreciated how much that influenced my point of view and my confidence growing up as a young person of color in a mostly white neighborhood in the Bay Area. But I realized it later, and I also realized how it impacted my perspective as a journalist. So I think being biracial allows you to be this bridge in conversations and in storytelling. And so when I eventually realized that I wanted to work in magazines, it wasn't because I was reading 17 or Teen Vogue necessarily. It was because I read Ebony and Essence, my mom's magazines, even as a young girl, because that's what I identified with. And so when I started my career at Ebony, I realized there was such a power in that audience, but I felt my mission was to bring that perspective to the mainstream. Like I didn't want to be kind of stuck in this Black media echo chamber, so to speak. I wanted to kind of break out of that and bring that perspective to Condé Nast. As soon as I got to Ebony, I was like, now that I've gotten here, I realize that I think I'm needed there. And so I kind of set my sights out to be at Condé Nast, which in my mind was the best of the best when you think of the publishing industry.
When you started working at Teen Vogue, you sort of worked your way up and also worked your way in as far as like infiltrating representation and diversity. As I was saying before, like I've sort of watched this entire Teen Vogue thing just as a subscriber, and it was really interesting to me because it hit a certain point before Trump, before the election, before all of these things where I realized that I could no longer read about like the same white girl over and over again, which I didn't even realize I was reading, because when you're always represented your entire life, you don't realize that there's people who don't get to be represented. And I think one of the biggest key points and one of the strongest things about Teen Vogue now is the amount of people it represents and its call to diversity. And not only just writing about diversity, but hiring people who represent that diversity. So when you did start working at Teen Vogue, you brought Philip on. So can you just tell us about like bringing people in, who you chose to bring in, how you wanted those perspectives to shine from the in out?
Yeah, well, I think in order to change the storytelling, you have to change the storytellers. And you can't, evolve as a brand. You can't think in new ways if the people are, if there isn't diversity of thought, of experience, of point of view. And so it's interesting because I think Teen Vogue has had this phenomenal moment where, we're now recognized as being a credible political news source for this young generation at a really, really critical time in our history, and for standing for diversity and for representation. And I think sometimes I'm asked, like, how did you do it? Like, as if it happened, like, you guys just came out of nowhere. Like, where were you? You guys were like this fashion magazine, and all of a sudden you became this political force. What happened? And the reality is, I think people think it happened when Trump showed up. People think it happened when Lauren Duca, who's one of our freelance writers, did this phenomenal piece called "Trump is Gaslighting America." And if you have not seen it, or read it, you should definitely. It's really phenomenal, and that story changed the narrative around what Teen Vogue stood for, well beyond our demo. But for folks like you who've been following Teen Vogue's trajectory along the way, you know that it actually started well before that. And so I always like to, I'm like, let's not give Trump that much credit, okay, for Teen Vogue's evolution. Like, it was, we were here doing this before that. But thank you for recognizing, and thank you for now being a part of the conversation. But to go back, I think what transformed Teen Vogue, what evolved Teen Vogue, was diversifying the people sitting at the table. And starting with, and this is not, I'm not taking credit at all. I think as soon as you put someone different in a position of power, just simply by the law of alchemy, like, it's going to change the nature of some of the conversations. And when that person brings in someone else with this perspective that has never been represented, the conversation is going to continue to shift in a different direction. So my first hire as beauty director at Teen Vogue was someone named Philip Picardi, who was this young, gay man. And I wanted him to be my the associate beauty editor. He was the best guy for the job, best person for the job. And so I remember when I went to say, like, exactly that, and we should hire him, it was sort of like, interesting. A boy in beauty, like, that's an interesting. And I was sort of like, this is at the time, Glee was the #1 show on TV. I was like, I think they're ready for this. Like, I think they're all right to take advice from a guy who can beat a face better than anyone I know. You know, like, I think we're ready. So bringing him in, and I'm like, you know, you'll fall in love with him, and they did. And together, you know, Philip and I created something that hadn't existed at Teen Vogue before, which was a safe space for those who feel othered. You know, and I think we talk a lot about first, and we celebrate first, but we don't talk a lot about the behind the scenes and what it takes to sustain that position, to thrive in that position, and not just survive. And I think your natural inclination when you are other, coming into a position of power, is first and foremost to assimilate. It's like, you just want to be respected, and you don't want your race to become a distraction. So you just do as you fit into the box, right? And I think I did do that for a while. I think it's a survival tactic in your professional life. I think a lot of people do that when they are different. But eventually, by hiring someone like Phil, and by Phil hiring someone who was, I think his first hire was a black gay man who was fantastic and headed up our social media, and then an Asian American woman who headed up the digital she was his deputy on digital, and you just created this space where it was safe for us to actually show up as our full selves and bring issues to the table that maybe we didn't feel so comfortable talking about before. And so Teen Vogue taking a hard look in the mirror and changing who was actually at the table is what changed the storytelling and created an authentic connection to our audience through that storytelling. So I like the opportunity to be able to actually tell that story. It's not something I actually have an opportunity to do very often, but that is the magic. That's the magic. You know, Phil came in, he had never had a black friend. And for him to come into a workplace where his boss was a black woman, he was able to see for the first time how racism shows up at work in subtle ways, microaggressions. And through my exposure to his experience as a gay man, even in 2013 or 14 or whatever it was, he experienced discrimination in New York City and would come to the office, and things happened to him where we cared for each other and we saw each other as humans, and we thought, we are creating this safe space for each other here. We have to do that with our platform for the audience, the millions of young people who feel the way we felt growing up. And we wanted to create a magazine that we wish we had, that was inclusive, that was vibrant, that celebrated representation, that showed the world as we saw it, which is beautifully diverse and colorful, and filled with substance. You know, we could talk about fashion and beauty, but we could also be so much more, and we can mean so much more to our audience. But it all started with changing the face of the brand from the inside.
I want to talk about sort of the magnitude of representation and the magnitude of diversity, especially how you were saying just as far as the people you were hiring, getting a chance to have them actually put people in the magazines who looked like them, who represented them. Can you talk about, especially as a young girl, as a young biracial girl, somebody who is entering into a world of editors where the space is predominantly white, like how do you talk to them about the importance of diversity, about gaining trust from your audience and broadening your audience? Because I think people, it's exactly what you were saying, people sort of categorize Black media into one box and the rest is all like mainstream media. So how did you sort of infiltrate that?
Well, I think the way Teen Vogue approaches fashion and beauty even has evolved, and I think we've started to see that beauty, for instance, is really it's a filter, it's a lens for how you want to be seen, and it's also it's a platform to have a conversation about identity, about representation, about who you are, self-expression, and so we dove a little deeper into the way we approached beauty, and one of our first stories that set us on this trajectory, I would say, in terms of our new editorial direction, was a story called Cultural Appreciation. I don't know how many of you guys might have heard about that story, but it all started from a conversation in the office where, we were seeing season after season, on the runways, designers were committing cultural appropriation, and they got the backlash season after season on social media, and Teen Vogue also was called out for cultural appropriation, throughout our history. And so at some point we all came together and we had to talk about it and say, well, we also had to create a safe space for people to ask questions like, what is cultural appropriation? And like, why is it actually wrong to put cornrows on a blonde, like, white girl? Like, why can't we do that? Why is it offensive? And we had to have hard, controversial conversations and confront each other around these issues that were already bubbling up in our audience, or in our community on social media in particular. And we were coming under fire. So it's either we ignore it, which isn't really an option today. There's a two-way dialogue, and the reader wants to be heard. Our reader in particular, they want their voices to be heard. So it forced this conversation inside, and we came up with this idea. We're like, if we're having this conversation inside, we should be fostering this conversation with our audience. And there probably are people that read Teen Vogue who also don't know what it is and don't know why it's wrong. And then there's also a ton of people who read Teen Vogue who feel personally offended by this. So how do we bridge the gap here? How do we be a gap? How do we be a bridge in the divide in this conversation? And how do we also inject some positivity into it? How do we bring it forward versus just contributing to like kind of the hate and the confusion and all of that? And so we came up with this idea to shoot real girls who come from these cultures that are routinely appropriated, and have them tell their audience what it is, why it's wrong, and what the difference is between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. So I remember we came up with this big idea. We're gonna get a Native American girl. We're gonna get an Afro-Latina with baby hairs. We're gonna get a Black girl with a big afro, freedom fro. And I remember my French creative director being like, "Really? We're gonna just find a Native American girl just walking down the streets in New York City to be in?" I'm like, "We're gonna find her. We are gonna find her." And we did find her. We hired an amazing street caster. And this story brought our whole team together. It elevated all of our consciousness. We learned so much from these girls. And in particular, the Native American girl we found, her name was Donnette, and she came with her beautiful headpiece that she earned in her tribe, and no one could touch it except her mother. So we had this hairstylist on set, and everyone's like, we cannot touch this. It's out of respect for her culture. And he's like, how do I do her hair around it? I mean, everyone became so much more culturally sensitive. And so I think our approach was, we have work to do. We need to build trust with this audience. And the way we're going to approach it is we're going to hand the mic over to the girls and use our platform to amplify their voices versus the old school way of approaching magazine writing and as like the authority. Like it's a one-way dialogue. We are the authority on XYZ, on trends, and we're telling you what you should think. This was tell the world what you think. We're handing the mic to you. And it was such a beautiful experience. We did a video series. There was a beautiful shoot in book. There was a digital rollout. And when it hit, we were like, this could go wrong. This could go terribly wrong because people don't really trust Teen Vogue to take on these types of issues. But when it hit, it exploded on social media, and it became a Twitter moment, and everyone was talking about it. And it reinforced for us that we're on the right track, we're doing the right thing, and there's a hunger, there's a true thirst for this type of authentic storytelling that brings people together. It's not about isolating anyone. It's really about just shedding light and educating and just informing people and being the bridge in a divide. So that was an important turning point for Teen Vogue.
You were touching on gaining trust from your audience. We were talking about this last night. Before you ran this piece on cultural appreciation, you got this piece done that was specifically about black hair, but the way it was received was different because your audience didn't trust you first. So
You're gonna
can
take
you
me
talk
back
about
there?
that experience?
We're gonna go there?
I want to go there.
We're gonna go there. Okay, so listen, we had work to do gaining trust. We had to, and we make mistakes going along the way when we're trying to change a brand and what it means and who it's speaking to. And so I told Rowan this story last night. Basically, when I started at Teen Vogue, as I said, I think there was a certain period of just gaining trust and just kind of assimilating. And I think about 2.5 years into my career, I was like, I am going to do a story about, well, it started with me taking a trip to Africa. I went to Rwanda and Ethiopia for the first time, and I got my hair braided. And as a biracial woman, it was sort of this experience of connecting with my African heritage, and I realized that there was such power in that hairstyle, and especially as a corporate leader in a predominantly white industry, for me to come back with these braids that were like down here and like blonde and very bold, it would make a statement. And I was ready for that. I felt beautiful. I felt like they were a crown. I loved them so much, and I loved what they reflected in terms of the culture. And so I came back, and I remember just experiencing interesting remarks, and none were intended with. There was no malintent, but I just think there was a lack of education about black hair and how to talk about it and what you should say and not say. And I think I remember. God bless her soul. There was a colleague, not at Teen Vogue, and actually not even in the industry anymore, but had worked in beauty for a very long time, 2 decades, more than 2 decades, and in a very respectable position. And she saw me and she goes, "Wow, your hair grew so fast. Wow, how did that happen?" And I thought, you work in beauty. You really should know that these are extensions, but it was illuminating because I was like, it's interesting that as a black beauty director, I'm expected to know about everyone's beauty, predominantly, white people, and you've been a beauty director for my lifetime, and you've never been expected to know about how to talk about black beauty. That was an interesting aha moment for me. And there was, again, it was not, I wasn't offended personally. And I know she didn't mean anything by it, but I thought, you know what? This is my opportunity to really lean in and tell a story in Teen Vogue that only I could tell. And so I wanted to do a story that was about how beauty can be a form of activism. And I told this, as a biracial woman, I told the whole story of going to Africa, coming back, and kind of what I experienced, and I tied it into the Zendaya fiasco of her going to the Oscars and Juliana Rancic saying that comment about her locks and how she handled it so beautifully. And so I kind of shouted her out in the story, and it was just this piece about, identity and hair and how they're all tangled up, and you can use your appearance to just as activism, as a form of activism. So when the story came out, I was very proud of this. We had a model who was a biracial girl with her braids on the cover of the story. And then when it goes out and somebody takes a picture of that photo, there's flash. She looks lighter, she looks even more light-skinned, and it goes out on Twitter, and with a headline that says, "Teen Vogue commits cultural appropriation once again." That gets retweeted and retweeted and retweeted. No one actually read the story. They just saw the picture. And again, without the trust built up with Teen Vogue, maybe it seemed to them, though, that was an egregious example of cultural appropriation. And next thing I know, I wake up and the Daily Mail had covered it. And the headline reads, "Teen Vogue publishes anti-black story." And my heart broke. And I thought I've really ruined things now, because I think my company probably, the reaction could have been, "This is why we don't go there. People don't understand. We'll get backlash. It's too risky. Let's stop doing that." But I really felt like this was an opportunity to start a nuanced conversation about race and identity with this audience that really actually wanted to have it if we engaged them. So I went against what I was told, and I wrote an essay, like an open letter, saying my perspective, like about what the story actually was about. And the problem with, I think, internet culture right now is that a lot of times we just see a headline and we don't read the stories. And I think that can be really problematic. So I wanted to remind people to take a moment to actually read the story. And once we did, it changed. Once I did that, I noticed that it was a risk, by the way. Like, it could have actually backfired even more. But I looked at the conversation that was happening on my Instagram. People were coming for me. And I read the comments, and eventually the model actually spoke out and said, "For anyone who cares to know, I'm actually black and French. So am I not black enough to wear braids?" And then it really changed the narrative, and people apologized and said, "Wow, I can only imagine how hard it must be for you in this industry. I'm so sorry that I attacked you and assumed that you were white and that this was cultural appropriation, and actually the story was really beautiful and had really a powerful intent, and I'm sorry." And then it wasn't even about the apologies as much as it was about opening up even more nuanced conversation about identity. Like, I'm half black, she's half black. I wore the braids, it was acceptable. She wore the braids, it's not acceptable because she's lighter than I am. Like, let's unpack this. And so we brought in this whole community, like on Black Twitter, that probably wasn't reading Teen Vogue, into this hotbed of debate, and came out closer. Like, we came out like on the other side, and we had gained a certain level of trust and understanding. Before that, I don't think that they knew I was there. I don't think they knew that there was a Black beauty director there representing a marginalized group of people and trying to bring that story to the mainstream. I don't think they knew that. But this was a relationship we had to build, and we had to nurture that. And I think by doing that, in some ways, we cleaned up our community. We created the kind of community that we really wanted at Teen Vogue, the people that we wanted to speak to about these things, these issues that were a little deeper than sort of just a trend story about braids, right? And so it felt like a feat. It was very difficult. It's always going to be difficult, though, when you're trying to make a change and you're trying to do something that's never been done before, or when you're even just trying to exist in spaces that you haven't before. You're going to experience challenges, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're making a mistake. It doesn't mean you should stop. In fact, it means you should keep going. It means your work is necessary. And I think that's what we started to see. 2 weeks later, I think I told you, I felt Like I had a moment to recover. Although the good thing is also people forget. Like
Yeah.
you go through experience, it could feel like everyone on Twitter, in the Twitterverse hates you. Give them 2 weeks, they'll move on to someone else. You know, like and you can recover, you can come back, and you can fix mistakes. Even if you make mistakes along the way, you can recover. And so 2 weeks after that, we actually came out with this really beautiful cover that had 3 Black models on it, and it was called The Freshest Face of Fashion. That was The Freshest Faces of Fashion was the cover line. And it's funny because my creative director, again, this French woman, I adore her, I've worked with her for 5 years. She said, I've spent a long time in this industry, and there's 3 things I've been told never to do. Models on the cover, no names, anyone who has no name, no household recognition, and Black girls. This was the trifecta.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we were going out and just getting behind it. And in all honesty, August issues typically don't sell very well. So we thought, you know, September issue is usually the issue that sells a lot. So we wanted to just let's go there. Let's do a passion cover that we really believe in. That cover that we really didn't anticipate would do extraordinarily well, just because it was an August cover, became our best-selling cover of that year, beating out Kylie Jenner. And again, there were these moments of awakening on our team, like all those things you were told not to do, all those formulas, they're played out. Let's throw them out and let's do what we care about. Let's do what we think is right. And let's start conversations that matter to us first and foremost, and then also to our audience. They're responding. So, yeah, that was that. And all that was before Trump, just want to say.
People want to see themselves. It's pretty simple.
It's pretty simple.
And people also are willing to spend money, want to buy something where they can see themselves.
Absolutely. There's a business imperative behind it, you know, and but you have to do the work. You can't just say that you celebrate diversity. You can't just, put someone of color or someone plus size or someone trans on a cover or in a campaign and say that you've done the work. If you haven't looked within your organization to see what's the makeup of our organization? Is it reflecting the audience that we really are hoping to speak directly to? And if not, that's the place to start. I think now that even in the last 2 years, like representation and diversity has become a conversation that more people are comfortable having, and it's at the forefront of a lot of organizations' minds. But because we know there's a business imperative and a business upside when you get it right. But I think we have to look inside, and we have to take a hard look in the mirror, and we have to start those conversations in the organization before you can start championing them externally.
Oftentimes, and just while we're having a conversation that was partially about beauty and beauty stories, people think that fashion and beauty are one thing, politics are a whole nother.
Right.
They don't work together, they're mutually exclusive, and you don't mix the two. How did you convince people that teenagers could not only be interested in what they were wearing and how we're doing our makeup or how we're doing our hair, but also we're interested in politics, and often those things coincide?
Well, first of all, the way that how we knew that was because of people like you. You exist. Like, when I remember a year ago, I think this is our 1 year anniversary, Rowan.
This is our 1 year anniversary.
When we first met, when I interviewed you for the cover, and she had a cover with Yara Shahidi from Blackish, who was also brilliant and dynamic, both of you. And I remember sitting there. You were 14, she was 16, and you guys were having a conversation about white privilege, about politics, your thoughts about Trump, your thoughts about Hillary.
This was before the election also.
This was before the election. You spoke so eloquently about what white privilege was and how you think about it, and I honestly was so inspired by you guys that I was like, this is who we need to speak to. These are the new quintessential cover girls for Teen Vogue. You guys were so dynamic and stylish. You were just at Fashion Week you're wearing Miu Miu today. Like, you can be both. We are both. And I think it's not exactly a novel notion that a woman can be both fabulous and love shoes and love talking about Bieber and wearing and wants to find the best bronzer and glittery nail polish, but also cares about the state of the world and is going to be on the front lines of protests and is going to change the world one day. Like, literally, you are going to be the generation that fixes all of this.
I hope so. I think so.
So we better take this opportunity to empower you and give you the microphone and make sure that the world knows who you are, what your care abouts are, and how powerful you really are. So that was such a special conversation for me. I loved even how you talked about representation. As a young white girl, you told me a story about seeing the impact of Princess and the Frog.
Yeah, I didn't realize for so long that I was always represented. I always saw myself. There was never a moment where I didn't even have to think about seeing myself because I was, I could always get a white Barbie. I could always turn on the TV and see a white girl. Like, it was never a problem. And then I remember one time my mom and I were watching like this Oprah special where they were talking to young black girls about the impact of Princess and the Frog when it came out. And I just remember having this realization, like, oh, wait, it's not just about me all the time. And just, I guess I learned about all of these things from the internet, which is why it's so nice to feel respected by this magazine. And when I speak on behalf of my generation, like, teenagers want to be heard. They want to feel accepted, and they want to feel respected. And I feel like Teen Vogue really respects us. And it doesn't ever feel preachy, it doesn't ever feel talk downy. It just feels like you understand that we have a seat at the table too, and I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Ro. We do it for you. Like, that's the thing. We do it because of you. Like, if you didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. But there are people like you and people who follow you that really want this kind of content. They want to engage with a brand that stands for something because you stand for something. And I do think that the world has changed a lot over the last 5 years. Like, and beyond, I don't think when I was your age, I don't think that I was as dynamic as you are. Maybe I don't think I was as informed as you are today. But I think it speaks to just who your generation is and how you were socialized, how you were raised. You were the first generation to grow up with the internet literally as your third arm. Like, you are more informed than any other young generation, and of course you're going to be more sophisticated in certain ways. And I'm grateful that there are people like you that have opened our eyes to how important speaking directly to young girls is, and to not underestimate them. Like, to your earlier point about, like, we don't need to choose a lane between beauty and fashion or being a serious political news source. I think it's wonderful that Teen Vogue is now being held up as this gem that represents, standing in the intersection of both. But it came as a huge shock to the world that Teen Vogue could do that. And we got asked a lot in the beginning, and sometimes still do, how do you have the audacity to do that? Like, aren't you a fashion magazine? How can you talk about politics? And I think, I think about that a lot, and I think what it really is a symptom of, like, that question is a symptom of a larger issue, which is underestimating young women and what they're capable of and what they care about. And so what my hope is for the success of Teen Vogue. I hope that it is ultimately shifting how people think about young women in their lives and how they think about talking to them and engaging them. I hope dads, like Dan Rather is a big fan of ours suddenly, by the way, and which is really great. And so I hope that people who identify and watch Dan Rather, dads out there, are coming home and thinking, I need to sit down and talk to my daughter about what she thinks about what's going on in this news cycle. how it's affecting her. And I hope that these changes at Teen Vogue are changing the way people think about, engaging with the young women in their life. And if that happens, then we've done our job.
I'm trying to think of like one last question to sum everything up, but I guess I would say now Teen Vogue sort of takes this extra level of importance because we're living daily about the aftermath of living in Trump's America.
Yeah.
How do you personally stay hopeful when it affects you personally living in this world?
Yeah, I mean, so two things. Self-care has never been more important. I've never thought much about that term, self-care. I know people talk about it a lot, especially in the wellness space, but as a manager, and as a manager today, a young woman of color, and in this opportunity where I can be a truth teller and empower a team of truth tellers who are radical and badass and the most amazing team, by the way. In order to come to work every day and be able to do that work and like fight these fights, I have to feed myself first. And I think that applies to everyone in this room. You have to make time to turn off the CNN news alert sometimes and just remember that this is a moment in time and we will get through it. And there are people like you who are going to make it so much better for everyone and for our children and our children's children. I think keeping you in mind inspires me and gives me hope. Really, I genuinely mean that. And then as far as how I think about moving forward with Teen Vogue, I think of our evolution in two parts. Phase one was about changing the editorial direction and deepening the connection with our audience, changing what we mean, what we stand for. And we've done that, and I'm so proud of the team. I'm so proud of what the team has been able to do. And I think phase two now is about really activating this audience. Like, we've galvanized this audience of young people who care about what's happening in the world and want to make a difference and truly believe that they can change the world.
And adults.
And
who
adults.
read Teen Vogue
Well,
too.
they're adults too. Yeah, power to Dan Rather, Trevor Noah, our new cool teen readers. But I think phase two is really about creating these communities where you can interact with the brand and each other to really get the community activated and give you and I think our job now is to give this audience the resources, the tools, and the community to go out and activate beyond the storytelling that we're doing. And so the way that we're going to show up, first step, is our summit. Our Teen Vogue, we're launching our first ever Teen Vogue Summit December 1st and 2nd in LA. And it's going to be a really inspiring 2 days of speakers, including Rowan's going to be on stage.
I'm going to be speaking with Ava DuVernay. So really excited about that.
Who's my personal shiro, by the way. But we're going to bring a number of female innovators, activists, and creators that are going to do a series of it's not meant to be one way. The communication is definitely two-way, and we're going to have keynotes, but we're also going to have workshops and breakout sections and roundtable discussions, because we want to hear from our audience and we want them to be talking to each other and building the tools that are going to actually affect change. So that's phase two. That's phase two.
Thank you. Thank you so much for just being you.
Thank you so much, Rowan. Should we do a selfie?
I think we should do a selfie.
I mean, in true Teen Vogue style, it didn't happen if there isn't an Instagram to show. So we're going to take a selfie with all of you, if you don't mind. Is that all right? Okay. All right, on the count of 3, cheer. 1, 2, 3.
Woo! Hi.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.